Hello, I'm here to tell you about the website that I created. Let's talk a little bit about it. So, if you notice, it's regularly standard, it's really standard. It has a few text boxes that we're asking the user to interact with, and a few things happen with that information. So, let's start by typing in a random name um, just off the top of my head. And let's pick a different radio button so that he knows that it works. And let's click submit. And it says, "Welcome, Jin Kawada. Jin, we are so happy you arrived. There is a growing community of middle schoolers who like funny series, books, who are just like you. May I make some suggestions?" And of course, the person's going to say yes. And when they say yes, it makes some suggestions. It offers 3 books. And if you notice, funny series is exactly what Mr. Kawada picked as the books that they like. And it actually shows their first and last name, which is pretty great. All right, so let's look at the script. I'm going to close this window. All right, so let's look at index.html. There are some pretty standard HTML5, CSS, and Bootstrap things going on. And let's talk a little bit about this form that I started right over here. You'll notice the word form, and there are some tags, and with the attribute of type, with the value of text, and those are your run-of-the-mill text boxes. I want you to pay attention to the IDs because the ID attribute is very important later on for how we tell JavaScript to select information. So we'll come back to that. Right over here, we have these radio dial buttons, and you know that because it says type equals radio dial. I've named them all the same, so they have the attribute of hobby RB, so that the computer understands that this is a set of information, and we would like to eventually collect the data from this information, from the data from the value of the information, and we want only the one that's checked off. So we'll be coming back to that later. We have this button, and if you notice, there's the on-click listening device. So it'll basically be listening for an event to happen, and the event that will be happening will be a mouse click in this case. And upon that mouse click, we're going to invoke the function of button pushed. We have these paragraphs and these divisions that have the ID of demo and print suggestions. We have another button that is also waiting for an event to happen, and that event will invoke the function called winning. So let's go look behind the JavaScript. Let's go look at the JavaScript. So we have script.js, which is awesome. And the first function that we're going to be looking at, and you know it's a declared function because of the word function as well as the parentheses next to the word button pushed, so that lets you know that it's a function. So we have the variable get name, and the variable get name is going to equal to document.querySelector, so document query selector, it returns the first element that matches the specified selector. And in this case, I use the ID selector of input name. So it's going to search for the first, for the item, the data from the item that fits that criteria. So that would be, in this case, it's going to end up being that text box that we named input name. And so it's going to take that information and it's going to put in the variable get name. And then the variable first name is asking, can I have the information that's equal to the value in your cadre of data? And so that's what's going to be placed in the first name. The same thing is happening with variable get name. It's using document query selector to survey the HTML script until it finds the item that I have designated as the selector criteria, which is again another ID, and we'll know that it's an ID because of the hashtag that's in front of the name, input name. Var last name does the exact same thing, and it's just asking for just the value of get name, and that's what's going to be stored in last name. We'll go over to Hobby Radio L, and the only difference between that one and the other two that we just mentioned is that instead of looking for an ID, it's looking for an attribute, and the attribute would be name being hobby RB as well as checked off. So that is what is what data is going to go into hobby radio L, and of course hobby is asking for just the value of that. Document get element by ID is kind of self-explanatory. It's getting an element, it's going to an element by ID, and that element is demo in this case. And inner HTML is going to write to the HTML and create text in this case, I believe it's a paragraph tag that has the ID of demo, and it'll write in that space welcome first name, last name, and there's a CAD return it so you can see a line break. First name and last name are variables that we're going to be are the variables first name and last name, and that's what they're pulling up. And right over here we have the hobby variable, so it's actually showing me the value of the hobby variable. It's showing me actually what hobby variable is. So right after that we have a variable called book list, and book list is an array of objects, an array that consists of 12 objects, and each object has 3 keys, and we're going to be accessing that information in a little while. So that's great to know. So 12 keys. If you notice the themes change, they're based on your choices actually. So let's talk about function winning event. So the variable hobby is, if there's going to be a query, and the selector of course is name hobby RB, and it's looking for the checked item and the value of that. So the value of that, and there's a for loop here that says if the variable place in the variable of test the object from book list. So it's going to go to the first object in book list and place it in test. And what's going to happen is the if statement will say if that item, that object that is in test, if the theme key, the key of theme is equal to hobby, the value of the key of theme is equal to hobby, then do the next thing. The next thing would be create this variable named message, and that variable will consist of test.title, which is, of course, title is the key of the object, by author, and then test.author, which is author being the key of the object that we're accessing. Document get element by ID, print suggestions. So it's looking for the ID of print suggestions, and get element by ID. That's why we don't have to do a hashtag. It says in the name, and write to the inner HTML. You're going to write the contents of message to the inner HTML, and that's how we got that list. So what I found very helpful to getting some of this work accomplished was that I used the console and I used breakpoints a lot to watch and see what was happening in the script. As you can see here, like I was saying, the contents of hobby would be YA topics, Y dystopian, and then right here, the theme of the book of the VAR suggestions in this case before I changed it would be YA topics, YA dystopian, and then if book list theme is equal to hobby, and it was, then it would alert me, hello, book list theme, and that's how I knew that this portion of it was working. And then I had to go ahead and create the other loop. Create the rest of it. So the else loop. The hard part for me was that sometimes the JS script just didn't load, and cancel. And because I was able to use the dev tools, I was able to see when the files I needed were not loading, and that was why sometimes my script was failing. And I had to figure out why the JS wasn't loading. But I found the dev tools, like right over here, as you can see, the JS did not load, just the index.html loaded. And that was very challenging for me, and I had to figure out why that was happening. So that was the dev tools were helpful in that regard. And of course, I used the alert function a lot as a beads for determining what was exactly working and what wasn't working. So thank you. Oh, another thing that was challenging was that, sorry, was that a lot of the work that we did together during the tutoring sessions or office hour sessions, things worked while in the form that you place them in. But when I move things like these things over to say a JS file, a lot of things stopped working. Like for example, pre-L inner.html stopped working, and I had to make choices about which DOM I was actually going to use. I still need to gain more understanding of how they work, but this definitely did give me a lot of information by like making hypotheses is what I think I understand about them. So that was very challenging for me to have something work, your examples work, and then switch them out and then they not work. However, it also allowed me to formulate questions that kind of helped me um, ask the right questions so that you could point me in the right direction. So, thank you.